I'm waiting for it to connect to the server. So here we are. This is the second lecture on Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is on fiscal policy. Now, as you recall, the last chapter was on government, but this chapter is on a specific area of government, and that is the area where the government makes decisions in terms of inflation and or unemployment. So, what can the government do to bring about more employment if we have unemployment? Or what can the federal government do to bring down the level of inflation if we have inflation? Now, there are fiscal policies and there are monetary policies. These are two sets of tools that we have to try to influence economic events. Monetary policies, of course, are policies of the Federal Reserve, either increasing the money supply or decreasing the money supply. If we have inflation, the Federal Reserve would want to decrease the money supply. If we have unemployment, the Fed would want to increase the money supply. But this chapter is on fiscal policies, the different things the government can do to try to stimulate demand. Now, that would be a Keynesian way of looking at it. Stimulate demand if we have unemployment, or to lessen demand if we have inflation. Now, fiscal policies aren't really talked much about when we have inflation. It's normally an unemployment tool, but theoretically these Keynesian policies, and it's mostly a Keynesian approach to economics, are more attributable to unemployment than they are inflation. But anyway, I do have a newspaper article for you that's I just found interesting, and I've got two videos for you. One is very short, but it's something that's very timely, and it's got a lot to do with fiscal policies. It's actually in today's Wall Street, well, I guess Friday's Wall Street Journal. But anyway, the article I want to just point out to you here is from Friday's Wall Street Journal, from the opinion page. It says, "The one kind of diversity colleges avoid." And it says here that many universities are redoubling their efforts to diversify their faculties in response to last fall's wave of protests from student groups representing women and minorities. Then it says, yet in my experience, no search committee has ever been instructed to increase political or ideological differences or diversity. On the contrary, I have been involved in searches in which the chairman of the selection committee stated that no libertarian candidates would be considered, or the description of the position was changed when the best resumes appeared to be coming from applicants with right-of-center viewpoints. And the point here is that even though universities are trying to diversify, one area that they don't diversify in is thought. That the faculty members thought up here, or viewpoints, political, ideological viewpoints, that there's a great deal of discrimination, that universities predominantly hire left-wing professors and discriminate against right-wing professors. In fact, it says here, according to data compiled by the Higher Education Research Institute, only 12% of university faculty identify as politically right of center, and those are mainly professors in schools of engineering or other professional schools. only 5% of professors in the humanities and social science departments are right of center. In other words, only 5%. I mean, what I'm telling you is that you're going to go on. I assume that all of you are going to go to a four-year school because that's what kind of course this is. And so you're barely halfway through, your college education. And you should know that, when you transfer to Tech or Radford or wherever, that the professors that you get are 95% of them are going to be very left-wing in their thinking. So something you ought to be aware of anyway. Any questions about that? Any questions about anything about what I've said? No? All right, well, let's see. I've got the second part to this video. And this is the video I'm going to show you next, or after when we start the chapter. But this is the second video on Fight of the Century, Keynes versus Hayek, Round 2.
I'm watching you. Lord Keynes, wow, it's such an honor.
Indeed, sir.
Please, just go right on through. Whoa. Identification, please. Hayek?
No, Hayek. Like, high explosives.
High explosive. We have a 1066 HQ, I repeat, we have a 1066.
Copy that, Mike. What is a 1066? That was just an example of how to pronounce it.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, we are here today to consider the impact of government spending on our economy. We're fortunate to have two world-renowned economists to offer their testimony on the matter.
I see you took a detour down the road to serfdom. Talk about the end of laissez-faire. Sheesh. Well, shake it off, Freddie. I'm not pulling any punches in there. I'm ready. Are you? Prepare for the return of the master.
John Maynard Keynes, F.A. Hayek, round 2, round 2.0. Same economists, same beliefs, new microphones, new mustaches. Here we are, peace out, Great Recession, thanks to me. As you see, we're not in a depression. Recovery, destiny, if you follow my lesson. Lord Keynes, here I come, line up for the procession.
We brought out the shovels and we're still in addiction, still digging. Don't you think it's time for a switch from that hair of the dog? Friend, the party is over. The long run is here. It's time to get sober.
Are you kidding? My cure works perfectly fine. Have a look, the Great Recession ended back in '09. I deserve credit, things would have been worse. All the estimates prove it, I'll quote chapter and verse.
Econometricians, they're ever so biased. Are they doing real science or confirming their bias? Their Keynesian models are tidy and neat, but that top-down approach is a fatal conceit. Which way should we choose? Up, bottom, up, or top-down? The fight continues. Keynes and Hayek, second round. It's time to weigh in. Both from the top, both from the ground. Let's listen to the great Keynes and Hayek throwing down.
We could have done better had we only spent more. Too bad that only happens when there's a world war. You can carve all you want about stats and regression. Do you deny World War II cut short the Depression?
Wow, one data point and you're jumping for joy. The last time I checked, wars only destroyed. There was no multiplier. Consumption just shrank as we used scarce resources for every new tank. Pretty perverse to call that prosperity. Ration meat, ration butter, a life of austerity. When that war spending ended, your friends cried disaster. Yet the economy thrived and grew faster.
You too only see The spending on war clearly goosed GDP. Unemployment was over, almost down to zero. That's why I'm the master. That's why I'm the hero.
Creating employment's a straightforward craft when the nation's at war and there's a draft. If every worker was staffed in the army and fleet, we'd have full employment and nothing to eat.
Jobs are a means, not the ends in themselves. People work to live better, to put food on the shelves. Real growth means production of what people demand. That's entrepreneurship, not your central plan. My solution is simple and easy to handle. It's spending that matters. Why's that such a scandal? Money sloshes through the pipes and the sluices, revitalizing the economy's juices. It's just like an engine that's stalled and gone dark. To bring it to life, we need a quick spark. Spending's the lifeblood that gets the flow going. Where it goes doesn't matter. Just get spending flow.
See slack in some sectors as a general plus, but some sectors are healthy, only some in a rut. So spending's not free, that's the heart of the matter. Too much is wasted as cronies get fatter. The economy's not a car, there's no engine to stall. No expert can fix it, there's no it at all. The economy's us, we don't need a mechanic. Put away the wrenches, the economy's organic.
Which way should we choose? What's bottom up or down? The fight continues. Getting high, it's second round. It's time to weigh in. What's from the top or from the ground? Let's listen to the breaks. Getting high and going
So
down.
what would you do to help those unemployed? This is the question you seem to avoid. When we're in a mess, would you have us just wait, doing nothing until markets equilibrate?
I don't want to do nothing. There's plenty to do. The question I ponder is who plans for whom? Do I plan for myself or leave it to you? I want plans by the many, not by the few. Let's not repeat what created our troubles. I want real growth, not a series of bubbles. Stop bailing out losers. Let prices work. If we don't try to steer them, they won't go berserk.
Come on, are you kidding? Don't Wall Street gyrations challenge a worldview of self-regulation? Even you must admit that the lesson we've learned is more oversight's needed, or else we'll get burned.
Oversight? The government's long been in bed with those Wall Street execs and the firms that they've led. Capitalism's about profit and loss. You bail out the losers, there's no end to the cause. The lesson I've learned is how little we know. The world is complex, not some circular flow. The economy's not a class you can master in college. To think otherwise is the pretense of knowledge.
Which way should we choose? What's bottom up or down? The fight continues. Getting high, it's second round. It's time to weigh in. What's from the top or from the ground? Let's listen to the breaks. Getting high and going
You get on
down.
your high horse and you're off to the races. I look at the world on a case-by-case basis. When people are suffering, I roll up my sleeves and do what I can to cure our disease. The future's uncertain, our outlooks are frail. That's why free markets are so prone to fail. In a volatile world, we need more discretion, so state intervention can counter depression.
People aren't chessmen you move on a board at your whim, their dreams and desires ignored. With political incentives, discretion's a joke. Those dials are twisting, just mirrors and smoke. We need stable rules and real market prices, so prosperity emerges and cuts short the crisis. Give us a chance so we can discover the most valuable ways to serve one another.
Which way should we choose? What's bottom up or down? The fight continues. Getting high, it's second round. It's time to weigh in. What's from the top or from the ground? Let's listen to the breaks. Getting high and going down. Which way should we choose? What's bottom up or down? The fight continues. Getting high, it's second round. It's time to weigh in. What from the top or from the ground? listen to the beats, tend to hide it going down.
Come get your econ stories. Make some noise. Same floor, yo. Same floor. Basquiat, say what? Say what? I don't mean to be subjective, but this is my Austrian perspective. Yo, where you at, Mises? Shout out to Malthus.
Well, any questions about that? You really had to listen to the words because there's a whole lot in there, but it really did describe the differences between Keynes and Hayek, or Austrian and Keynesian economics. And the big thing, of course, is that Keynesians look at the economy as a machine, and Austrians look at the economy as organic. That's a big difference. The Keynesians believe that if the government has enough control over the economy, that we can guide the economy to full employment and stable prices. We just need enough knowledge about how the economy works, which is really the point of the next video I'm going to show you. But we just need enough if we had just enough knowledge and we had the proper tools in terms of fiscal policies, that we could guide the economy, and if we ever have a problem with unemployment, we just turn a few dials and adjust this and adjust that, and then we could move the economy, back to full employment. I mean, that's basically the idea of Keynesian economics. Yeah.
Does it
Dimitri?
start with the Federal Reserve, how it was established around the same time period as this, about how essentially you could just make money out of thin air? Because that's what I mean.
Well, that's
I
a
was
part.
reading I think either 5 or 6.
Yeah, that's a part of it.
Like you said,
we-
turn a few dials and then.
Yeah, we have.
turn out money.
Yeah, well, you would like to think, and usually monetary and fiscal policies go hand in hand, and there is a great deal of relationship, of course, between the federal government and the Federal Reserve. So, in other words, if we
Wait,
have
I thought you said it wasn't in the book. It said that they're not connected.
well, they politically,
entities.
yeah, well, politically they are, and it's really hard to say how much they are because so much is unknown, to tell you the truth.
Really?
The books of the Federal Reserve has never been audited. There's a lot of, it's very opaque, so it's really hard, hard to say.
No, because I remember reading this actually yesterday that I think the book said that the Federal Reserve is not part of the U.S. government. at
Technically,
all.
it's not.
It's a completely different entity.
Yeah, it is. It
and
is.
they have what you said, they're not. They can literally do whatever they want. And if the government requests we need $1 million, it just snap of a finger, and then it's all electronic, and then it just creates $1 million out of ones and zeros.
The Federal Reserve does.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it ties in with the government. And that's what the textbook was talking about.
Yeah. I mean, when the government wants to borrow money, then it can sell bonds to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve simply creates money to buy the bonds. That's called quantitative easing,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and that's what central banks all over the world are doing. In fact, I know I just got back from this econ conference in Alabama, and I was talking to 3 professors from Germany, and they said that not only can a European central bank create money, or euros out of thin air, but each of the individual countries, like Germany or Spain or France, each country has its own central bank that deal in euros, and they can also create money.
Didn't
Fiat.
someone also say that like it doesn't even go to like our country? It usually just ends up like spreading out around the world. Like the money that's made out of like thin air, it usually just like circulates, like it ends up circulating around the world and not intentionally.
Yeah. See, that's in fact that's a big the next chapter is on inflation, but it all kind of ties together. But inflation. The most common explanation is you got too much money chasing too few goods. That if you increase the money supply more than goods and services, then you're going to get inflation. And the reason I mention that is exactly what you said. I mean, if that's the case, then why don't we have more inflation in America? And the answer, exactly. The answer is that you've got to look at this thing in a world view. You can't look. I mean, the United States is just part of the world economy.
Because we're trading, right? Because like.
Well, we're very much interlinked.
Yeah.
And the same group that more or less controls things in the United States also controls Europe and Japan, and I mean this is a world situation, not just one country. That's why the countries of the world today are on the same song page, so to speak, in terms of their monetary and fiscal policies.
Does that also have to do with the petrodollar?
There is no country that I know of that really practices Austrian economics. All countries are practice Keynesian economics because they're all on the same song page. What was that question?
Something to do with the petrodollar.
Well, yeah, that's got a lot to do with the petrodollar. For those that don't know what the petrodollar is, when America, but it's all tied together. When America went off the gold standard permanently in was it 1973?
Like and then like.
No, that was after JFK. This is under Nixon. This is under President Nixon. Well, now let me explain. We went off the gold standard, which gave the United States less influence in the world, and so the government came up with the idea of the petrodollar, and they convinced Saudi Arabia. They said, we'll protect you militarily for free if you agree to only accept payments for your oil in dollars, U.S. dollars, and then other countries took up on that same deal, and that's what's the petrodollar system, and that's what made the United States dollar the world standard currency, but that system is quickly breaking down.
Like I read that like Saddam Hussein was actually the first he was like the first to actually try to avoid it, like try to get over like the petrodollar to like improve his economy, and that's like kind of why we like invaded them, like.
Well, that's let's not get into that now. Let's not get too far afield here. There's a lot of rabbit trails we could go down at this point, but I got to stick to the subject, or we'll never get through this.
But like, isn't that like?
Yeah, it's all related. Yes.
Yeah, like because he
absolutely.
Like, he essentially avoided that, and then George H.W. Bush was like, yeah, I don't think so, and then like started like pretty much like the invasion.
Well, let's not get into that. Yeah, I mean you could.
But that's what happened though.
Well, but let's not get into that. You get into a lot of misunderstandings and is that a conspiracy theory or is it real? I mean, I don't want to get into that. right at this point.
Yeah.
You know, but I'll try to stick to the topic. Anyway, there's another article here from the opinion page of the Wall Street of yesterday, and it says cracking Washington's black box, and it says here. We recall once asking visitors from the Congressional Budget Office how they arrived at their estimates that higher government spending always increases GDP and job creation. Now here's the point. The point is this. If the premise of Keynesian economics is to increase demand. Now we're talking about fiscal policies. This is a fiscal policy, so it deals exactly with what this chapter is all about. If we're going to increase consumer demand when we have unemployment, then when do we have an unemployment problem? I mean, how serious is the unemployment problem? And consequently, how much should we increase demand by? Because if we increase the demand too much, we could overstimulate the economy and cause inflation. If we don't stimulate demand enough, then we may stimulate more jobs but not bring the economy to full employment equilibrium. And so someone has to make this analysis. I mean, okay, you know, what's happening out there in the economy? And what this article is about is that we all depend on government statistics, like the Congressional Budget Office. And as it says here, we recall once asking visitors from the Congressional Budget Office how they arrived at their estimates that higher government spending always increases gross domestic product and creates more jobs. The answer was the models. Well, which models? Now, which economic thought is tied to economic models? Keynesians or Austrians? Well, Keynesians are more in tune to building models because they look at the economy as a machine, and so they draw models of cause and effect in terms of if you increase spending so much, employment will increase so much, etc. But the point here is the Keynesian economic models that assume that $1 of spending produces some multiplier of higher GDP. And the CBO doesn't share these assumptions with mere journalists. In other words, the point here is that no one really knows how the government comes up with these statistics. It's just like a black box, and they just say, well, if we increase taxes by so much, that the employment's going to increase so much. Well, how do you know that? How'd you come up with that? Those conclusions? Well, you just have to trust us that's what it is, and that's really the case. So this next video here is actually about this article, and it'll give you perhaps it can explain it better than I can. This is from Wall Street Live, by the way. It's an excellent news program put out by the Wall Street that's free on the internet. But see, this is the opinion journal, Tyranny of Non-Experts, talking about the Congressional Budget Office and this whole idea of Keynesian stimulus programs.
In Washington, here to tell us about it is our editorial page editor, Paul Gigot. Paul, this is, I'm going to get in the weeds here. This can be kind of a wonky topic.
And you're just the guy to do it.
I'm going to give it a shot here. We normally think of if politicians are debating whether a given bill is going to make the economy grow or not, whether it's going to cost a lot of money or not. These ought to be things that you debate in the democratic process. But
right.
We have these two institutions, the Congressional Budget Office and the Joint Committee on Taxation, that have these special powers to tell us what they think will happen in the future, and really lawmakers are bound by these predictions they make.
Well, they're not really, but they've bound themselves.
Right.
They're not ultimately bound by them, but they have said, please, pin us down.
Yeah.
You know, stop us before we do something. But it's not just those two bodies. Also, the Environmental Protection Agency. It's any regulatory body that proposes a new regulation. They're supposed to do under the law cost-benefit analysis. But what those agencies don't tell you is what are the basis for those costs and those benefit analyses. What are their underlying assumptions? And that it's a black box. It's something that, you know, we'll just let you know the final outcome, and you have to live with it. You know, gentle people, just tough luck for you. And so what this institution is doing, the American Enterprise Institute, is trying to start an open source data center that would create alternative ways of looking at the same thing and measuring and testing the assumptions that the government uses to come up with policies, and saying, well, is this right? Is this accurate? Or is there another and better way of looking at it?
So when there's a bill before Congress on taxes or spending, and instead of the hope here is that instead of all of us having to rely on forecasts that come out of these essentially unelected bureaucracies that are housed within the Congress, we could actually have the normal debate of economists in the field studying it, perhaps suggesting changes in the model, places where it's wrong. I mean, it's kind of amazing. We've come this far, and these basic questions aren't debated openly.
Well, so many of the assumptions that have been embedded here promote the expansion of government. So if you're the party of government, you like it because it just burrows in and you grow the government. For example, the Keynesian multiplier on spending. You know, we've had CBO visitors, Congressional Budget Office visitors here over the years many times, and we asked them, so why is it that every time you propose an increase of spending, it equals X increase in GDP plus job creation, even if it's lousy, wasted spending? And their answer is, that's the model. And the model is the Keynesian multiplier, 1.5, 1.7 times, whatever, for every dollar of spending. Really? Is that your model? Let's test that. Let's have alternative ways of looking at it, making sure that people understand what these assumptions are.
That's right. And I mean, if only, I'm thinking about Obamacare, the stimulus, you would have loved a lot more transparency. A lot more transparency and a lot more debate within the economic community about the promises that were made in terms of the finances.
That's right.
Okay, so the American Enterprise Institute trying to challenge the government black box. Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Thanks, James.
No.
I hope I got this right. Let's see. He talked about the Keynesian multiplier, which is something that I've talked about. Let's see, a slideshow from current slide. The Keynesian multiplier is the idea that a dollar in the hands of government has more impact on employment than a dollar in the hands of a citizen. Now, why would that be? Why would a dollar in the hands of government have more impact on employment than a dollar in the hands of a citizen? And the answer is that when we, the people, have money, that we will spend a part of the money and save a part. Now, savings in economics is defined as money earned but not spent. And taxes is a form of forced savings, and by definition, taxes is savings. You earn money, but you don't spend it. You give it to the government in taxes. So by definition, that's savings. It may not be voluntary savings, but it's still savings. So the point here is that if we have unemployment, if the government were to increase taxes, if they were to take more money away from citizens, then the government would spend all that money. And therefore, there's a bigger multiple effect on the economy than if you and I had the money. If you and I had the money, then we would save a part and spend only a part. But if the government has the money, the government spends all of it, and therefore there's a multiple effect on the economy, and that's called the Keynesian multiplier. All right? That's a pretty basic part of Keynesian economics. Notice here that it disregards the benefits of savings. There's, Keynesians don't really talk about savings too much. It's all demand driven. But this does bring us to the liquidity trap, which is related because we're talking, about spending and savings. When I say spending, by the way, that's an example of injection, that money is being put into the economic system. Okay? There are what are called injections and leakages. Injection is when money is put into the system. A leakage is when money is taken out of the system. The system, in our case, being the American economy. So like when we put money in the bank, that's a leakage. When the bank lends money out, that's what's called an injection. Now what the liquidity trap is, that these are some basic pillars of Keynesian economics. I just explained the balanced budget multiplier. That's, balancing the budget multiplier is you increase taxes by $1 and then you increase spending by $1. So you've balanced the budget, and so if you increase taxes and balance the budget, then you're exercising what's called the balanced budget multiplier, which is what I just explained. But what the liquidity trap is, and I explained this last time, but it's so important that I'm going to go over it quickly again, is that you've got people put money into banks, and then banks lend that money out. And then money gets back into banks, and banks lend the money out, and that's called the circular flow of money. Now, what the liquidity trap is that people put money in banks, but for several reasons, banks can't lend enough of that money out. So that injections are greater than leakages. More money is going in than coming out. And this causes the economy to become anemic. And so monetarily, what would happen is that banks put lower interest rates in order to get rid of their excess reserves. Okay, their excess reserves are too much, so they want to they got to lend that money out, so they lower interest rates. But there's lots of reasons why people won't borrow money, even if we have our interest rates. Unemployed people aren't going to run the bank and borrow money to buy a new car just because of lower interest rates. Or investors aren't going to go to the bank and borrow money to make an investment if they're very pessimistic about the future. And so money just sits there despite the lower interest rates. And of course, in today's market with almost zero interest rates, well, that's even more of a complication. But anyway, so we have what is called a liquidity trap. Banks are caught with too much liquidity, and we call that, Keynes called this in this general theory, published in 1936, a liquidity trap. So what is the answer to a liquidity trap? Well, the answer to liquidity trap is for the government to borrow the money. I mean, if consumers aren't going to borrow it, if investors aren't going to borrow it, then the government can come and borrow that money from banks, take away their excess reserves, and then they can inject it into the economy through one government program or another, and that will pump prime the system and get a demand moving in a positive direction. Now, even to an Austrian, that argument actually makes a lot of sense. And the other, the paradox of thrift, what this says, it says it's really an answer to the Austrians. The Austrians emphasize savings. They say that we should have more or less a free market. Now remember, even in Austrian economics, that doesn't mean no government. That we, the people, have to be protected from big business, the concentration of power, when it comes to well, in a free market, that's what would happen. Big business we would be dominated by monopolies. And so Austrians understand that we need government in order to protect the people from monopoly power, and from too much concentration of power in the hands of business. But anyway, what the paradox of thrift is that Austrians, however, do emphasize more individualism in terms of savings. The basis of growth, according to Austrians, is people work, they save a part of what they earn, and then those savings is used to make investments. Okay? Now, with the Keynesians, by the way, in today's world, by discouraging savings, where does a lot of this money come from for investments? See, this is where Austrians and Keynesians differ. Austrians, you work hard, people save a part of what they earn, savings builds up, investors borrow that savings, and that's how we make profitable investments that grow the economy. Well, if you discourage savings, where is that money going to come from that can be borrowed to stimulate investments? Anybody? Well, the money is created. I mean, instead of people working hard and saving and putting their savings in the banks, the Keynesian answer is, in today's world, well, why do all that if we can simply create the money out of thin air? Which we do, which all central banks in the world do. Okay. Well, the paradox of thrift says that what is true for the individual may not be true for the whole. In other words, for you as an individual, the formula for wealth building is to save, put your money into savings, make a return on it, because that's a big tragedy today, that people are discouraged from savings because interest rates are so low. But if interest rates were not controlled by monetary authorities, they would be a lot higher than they are today. People would have the incentive to save because they would make a return on their savings in terms of interest, and then you put that money in places where money begins to work for you instead of you working for the money. See, that's the principle of wealth building. The lowest form of making money is to trade hours for dollars. You work so many hours, you get back so many dollars. See, you're working for money when you trade hours for dollars. But people who become better off monetarily, they work it so that money works for them instead of them working for the money. That should be your goal in life. Your goal in life should be money work for you instead of you work for the money. An example of that would be you work, you save, you buy an apartment buildings, for example, and then renters work to pay you rent. See, now your money is working for you instead of you working for the money. All right? And there's thousands of different ways to do this, but the key is to get money work for you instead of you work for the money. All right? But what the Keynesians say is that, well, if everyone does this, then if everyone saves more, then demand is going to be insufficient to sustain full employment. And that's called the paradox of thrift. See, the paradox is that if individuals work and save and then put their dollars to work for them, then they can become wealthy and financially independent. But if everyone does this, then according to Keynesians, then we have a paradox. The paradox is, if everyone does this, then the economy suffers through insufficient demand, and therefore we have more unemployment instead of less. So there's a big difference there. The Austrians would favor, the Austrians would not favor government control over interest rates. Austrians would favor that interest rates would be determined by market forces, whereas Keynesians they're more in control. Keynesians want to control the level of interest. That's why, in Europe we have negative interest rates. Well, in a free market, you would never have negative interest rates. That would be an impossibility. It's only possible because the market's not a free market. It's totally controlled by monetary authorities. All right, so let's see. I talked about this multiplier, paradox of thrift. Crowding out is the idea that now what we're going to talk about is we're going to get into the area of just analyzing these Keynesian policies. What crowding out means is that at any one point in time, there's just a finite amount of money that can be borrowed from, savings. Well, now I guess I can't even call it savings anymore, because when the government creates money, that's not really savings. The world has changed so much over the past, decade or so. But anyway, what crowding out means is that at any one point in time, there's a certain amount of savings, and under a market, in a market economy, that's where money would be borrowed from. And consumers borrow money to buy cars, investors borrow money to make investments, and the government borrows money to spend on government programs. Well, there's competition for this money. I mean, there's not enough money available for everybody. Consumers want it, investors want it, government wants it. Now, in this competition, the government holds all the aces. In this competition, government can borrow whatever they want because they've got the resources to do so, and what's left over goes to consumers and investors. Now, what crowding out means is that if the government borrows too much of these savings, then there may not be enough money left over for consumers and investors to reach their potential. And that's what's called crowding out. In other words, the government, if they borrow too much, they can crowd out consumers and investors from the loanable funds market, which is the market where money is bought and sold in terms of borrowing and lending. But like I say, I don't know how that fits in today's world where most of their money is simply created out of thin air, willy-nilly. How does the government borrow money? Of course, you all know this by now, right? The only way the government borrows money is by selling a bond. There are all types of different bonds I'm not going to get into, but like savings bonds, but there are many, many other type bonds. Another name for these bonds is securities. The government borrows money by selling securities, which is a bond. And they can sell it to whomever, but they can sell it to the Fed. Now, when they sell bonds to the Fed, and the Fed takes money that it has to buy those bonds, that's not quantitative easing. All right? The federal government sells bonds to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve takes money that it has, buys those bonds. That's not quantitative easing. What quantitative easing is when the government sells bonds to the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve creates new money to buy the bonds. See, that's quantitative easing. Quantitative easing requires the creation of new money, which we can only do because the world is on a fiat money system where no money is backed up by gold or silver or anything else. The open market is simply a market where bonds are bought and sold. Just like stocks are bought and sold in the stock market, bonds are bought and sold in the open market. Okay? People sell bonds there. People buy bonds It's a location. It's a place, the open market. And this is kind of interesting. Every semester I have to modify this. I did look this up. I did look this up. Let's see. I hope I can get back here. See, it's over 19 trillion now. But look at this. The debt per taxpayer is almost $161,000. So every person in the United States who pays taxes, their share of the national debt is $161,000. Now, what is the difference between paying interest, but by you working, earning money, and then paying interest? What is the difference between paying interest on a private loan of $160,000 or paying your share of the national debt of $160,000? Is there a difference? In terms of the money coming out of your pocket, is there a difference? And the answer is there is no difference. There is no difference. All right. If you're a taxpayer and your share of the national debt is like you owed $160,000, the same amount of money is taken out of your pocket as if you had a personal debt of $160,000. I mean, money out of your pocket is money out of your pocket. Period. Does that make sense? Another statistic here. Budget deficit, Medicare, Medicaid, U.S. total interest paid, U.S. total debt. U.S. total debt. That means everybody in the United States. All right. I mean, if you counted people, how much are you in debt? How much are you in debt? How much are you in debt? If you add up all personal debt, it would be $64 trillion. Now, how much money does Citibank owe, or how much does Citibank have invested in the derivatives market? $62 trillion. Now, can you catch a hold of that? If you add up all the debt that everyone in the United States owes, you get $64 trillion. If you look at Citibank, that one bank, and say, how much money do you have invested in the derivatives market? It's $62 trillion. Deutsche Bank has $75 trillion in the derivatives market. Does that give you an idea of how much money we're talking about here? The derivatives market dwarfs all of this. The derivatives market today is over a $600 trillion market. See, that's why, why is it that we can create money and yet we don't have inflation? Dimitri, we create money, but we don't have inflation. How come?
Because of the Federal Reserve,
well, come on,
the money goes out all around the
yeah,
world.
exactly, because all that money doesn't get into the American economy. Where does it go? It goes into the world. Well, what market of the world does it go into?
All of it.
The derivatives market.
The what?
The derivatives market. See, that's the market that people with a bunch of money, that's their playground. All right? Instead of the money, when money is created, instead of that money getting into the U.S. economy where it would cause inflation, we have almost no inflation because money goes into the world economy, but the market that it goes into primarily is the derivatives market. And I've explained to you what a derivative is before, many times, right?
I didn't really understand that. Derivatives.
A derivative?
Yeah.
Here's a derivative. You and I get together, and I say that May 5th the sun's going to shine, and you say it's going to rain. And we wager $1,000. And so we write this up on this piece of paper. So May 5th, the winner of this wager collects $1,000 from the loser. This piece of paper is a derivative.
Oh.
That's the derivatives market.
So then, like, how does that, like, how does it play a role into, like, the derivative of, like, $64,000 or $64 trillion or something like that?
Well, the derivatives market is over 600 trillion.
So how does that, like
Well, that's a notional value of the derivatives market. What's that?
how does, like, could you explain more on, like, how, like, I mean, I get the principle of what you just said about derivatives, but how does that, like, correlate to, like, the actual, like, market? Is that, like, someone betting against someone else?
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, it's two people making a bet on the outcome of some future event.
With, like,
See,
$600 trillion?
this piece of paper has a value of $1,000.
Mhm.
Well, what gives this piece of paper $1,000 value? The $1,000 was derived from the bet that you and I made.
Mhm.
That's why this market is called the derivatives market, because values are derived from something else.
Mhm. I kind of get it.
Okay, what does monetizing the debt mean, quantitative easing? All right, that's, I've talked about this before. We used to call this concept of the Federal Reserve creating money to buy bonds monetizing the debt. Today we call it quantitative easing. That's something the government does when something becomes very unpopular, they simply change the name, and then it seems to be okay. So instead of call it monetizing the debt, now we call it quantitative easing. What can monetizing the debt lead to? The fall in value of the dollar and inflation. We just talked about, that, and the derivatives market and all that. What is discretionary fiscal policy? Now, there are two types of fiscal policies. There's discretionary fiscal policy and there's automatic stabilizers. A discretionary fiscal policy is when someone has to make a decision to do this or to do that to solve this problem or that problem. Okay, an automatic stabilizer is something that just happens automatically without anyone making a decision. For example, if we have an unemployment problem and Congress decides to lower taxes, then that would be a discretionary fiscal policy. See, it was up to the discretion of Congress to do this or to do that. So they decided to change the tax laws. Okay, now if you are employed for so long, but then you become unemployed, you may be qualified for unemployment benefits. Now that's a fiscal policy because the government is putting money in the hands of an individual and for the purpose of increasing demand, but it's not a discretionary fiscal policy, it's an automatic stabilizer because when you become unemployed, Congress doesn't have to pass a law making money available to you. The law has already been passed, the money's been allocated, and if you meet the requirements of the law, then you get the money. See, and it's a automatic stabilizer as a fiscal policy because the last thing in the world we want is for a bunch of people becoming unemployed and then simply quit spending money. Demand would go down a lot, more people become unemployed as a result, and we have this big economic collapse. So the theory is that when people become unemployed, we give them money to prop up demand that will prevent more people, at least not as many people, from becoming unemployed. See, that's why unemployment benefits is an example of a fiscal policy that we call an automatic stabilizer. It automatically stabilizes the economy. Government purchases are some examples of fiscal policy, transfer payments, taxes. I mean, there's lots of ways that the government can influence demand through these different broad ways. And automatic stabilizer, I just explained, like unemployment benefits. Some examples of unemployment stabilizers: welfare, unemployment benefits, other government programs. All these are aimed at propping up demand when otherwise people would not spend money. That's why they're called automatic stabilizers. And what is the point to Keynesian economics? The economy could be stuck below the potential output for a prolonged period of time. You know, the point here is that see, an Austrian would believe that if you had a relatively free market, that that you would have ups and downs. You'd still have the business cycle. You'd have well, perhaps not booms and busts, but you'd have ups and downs. Booms and busts are more of a Keynesian phenomena, according to an Austrian. But the whole point is to move the economy to a full employment equilibrium so that it's tending toward a point of full employment. That's the idea behind Keynesian fiscal policies. Now, if we're going to adjust demand in order to bring about a full employment equilibrium, then we have to have full knowledge of how the economy works. And that's what this video that I showed you at the beginning of my lecture was all about. I mean, you know, who analyzes the economy so that we know how to make these kinds of decisions? Well, government agencies. Well, how do they do it? How do they come up with this information? Well, the point to the video was, who knows? It's a black box. I mean, they just kind of, I mean, no one knows how these government agencies do, we don't know how they come up with the information they do. That was really the point to the video. Okay, that's pretty self-explanatory. Let's see, just we're kind of running out of time here. These policies are almost never used with inflation. For example, if we have unemployment, well, I tell you, you know, things have changed so much. It's hard to talk about these things. But still, fiscal policies are used more during periods of unemployment than they are inflation. Okay, let's see. And the multiplier, we already talked about the Keynesian multiplier. You know, the idea of the multiplier is that the government spends $1, someone receives that $1, they may save a portion of it, but they're going to spend most of it. A third person receives it, they save a part of it, but they spend most of it. A fourth person receives it, and so that's how the multiplier works. You know, that if the government increases spending by $1, does it stop there? I mean, has spending simply increased by the total sum of $1? And the answer is no, it doesn't. Why not? Because of the Keynesian multiplier. Well, what is the Keynesian multiplier? Well, the Keynesian multiplier is money doesn't, you don't spend $1 and then someone receives it and it just stops there. That person spends it, and then money gets to a third person, and the fourth person, the fifth person, the sixth person, etc. See, that's called the Keynesian multiplier. So if the Keynesian multiplier were 4, for example, if government statisticians came up with that figure, that the Keynesian multiplier was 4, that would mean that for every $1 the government increases spending by, that total spending would increase by $4. See, that's called the Keynesian multiplier because of this process that I showed you. But beside the multiplier, there's also an accelerator effect. What the accelerator effect is, okay, we increase spending, we build a new highway, there's a multiplier effect along the way, but lo and behold, now that we got a new highway, somebody comes along and builds a gas station. Someone comes along and builds a new motel. So now we've got spending that has increased above and beyond the multiplier, and we call that additional spending the accelerator effect. So when we increase, and all this is Keynesian, by the way. This is the way that, I'm talking like it were Keynesian. The whole idea is we increase spending by $1. There's a multiple effect on it. And then under certain conditions, there's also going to be an accelerator effect on it. The whole point here is that demand increases by a multiple of the initial increase in spending. That's really the nuts and bolts of Keynesian economics. And this brings us into some actual mathematical computation. Now here is just something that you just should know for your further education in the business field or economics, and it's strictly Keynesian. But what the market propensity to consume is that when people receive $1, or let's say they receive $100, out of that $100, how much will they spend and how much will they save? Well, yeah, it would be, actually today it would be 50. We would call that, now the word propensity means a tendency toward. So remember, in economics, we can't always say, well, this is the way things are, but we can say that there's a propensity for things to be this way or that way. And so you're right, actually. We have figured that the marginal propensity to consume is about 50%. In other words, we say that when people receive $100, that there's a tendency for them to spend $50 and save $50. Now, does that sound reasonable? I mean, if you go out there in the street and gave someone $100, would you assume that they would save a half of that and spend a half? Well, I don't think so, right? I mean, most people wouldn't save, out of $100, they're not going to save $50. At least not how do you say, I'm missing a word, voluntarily. But what about involuntary?
Would they say like 10% of it?
Well, the point I'm making is involuntary. See, what's involuntary savings? Taxes is an example of involuntary savings. Or money that let's say you have a job, but a part of the money you earn goes into your insurance.
Or Social Security.
Or Social Security. Or retirement.
Or the other number of
Or a number of things. All these things is money that you earned, but you didn't spend. So by definition, all of these things are savings. They're involuntarily, you volunteered to put money into your retirement or into insurance, but it's not the same as spending money on a new computer or something. So that if you consider any money earned but not spent as savings, then actually it might be reasonable that the marginal propensity to consume today would be maybe 50%. And if the marginal propensity to consume were 50%, the marginal propensity to save would be 50%, because whatever you don't spend, you save, and vice versa. The two have to add up to one whole. Now, here I use 3/4, but if the marginal propensity to consume were 3/4, what is MPS? Well, MPS would be 1/4, because MPC plus MPS always has to equal one whole. What is the value of the Keynesian multiplier if this were the case? Well, the formula is 1 over MPS, the marginal propensity to save. So if the marginal propensity to save is 1/4, then the Keynesian multiplier would be 4. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that according to Keynesian statisticians, economists, that if the multiplier were 4, and if we want to increase spending by $4 trillion to bring about full employment equilibrium, then how much would we increase spending by? 1 trillion. Because the 1 trillion would have a multiple effect on it as 4, which would be 4 trillion, which is exactly what we wanted. Now, what would happen if we didn't know about the multiplier and we said, okay, we have to increase total spending by $4 trillion, so the government increased spending by $4 trillion. Well, there's a multiple of 4 on it. Now we got 16 trillion. What have we got? Well, we've got too much spending. We've got hyperinflation. All right? So Keynesians have to know what the multiplier value is in order to ascertain how much we have to increase spending by to bring about full employment without causing inflation. As you say, this is very Keynesian. Now, an Austrian would never talk about this in these terms. This is someone who is looking at the economy as a machine. We can calculate, we can adjust the dials, we can manipulate things to get to points that we want to get. I mean, that's typical Keynesian, all right? Yeah.
You said an Austrian would never talk about it, but would they agree with the theory behind it?
Yeah, boy, that's a good question. Gee, that's a very good question. That's very insightful. And I would say yes. I mean, the whole idea of the multiplier is valid. Yeah, that was very insightful. But to use it as a fiscal tool, the Austrians wouldn't use. Yeah. And this simply shows that if we had an original $100 and the margin for Pensy to consume is 3/4, someone receives 100, someone receives 100, they spend 75, that person spends 3/4, that person spends 3/4. If you added up all these numbers, 3/4, 3/4, 3/4, 3/4, till you got down to the last penny, and then added all these numbers up, you get about $400, which is why the Keynesian formula for the multiplier is 1 over MPS. I mean, 1 over MPS gives us the same number. What effect does the increase in demand have on price and output? Okay, now here we really get into something here, a little detail here you can catch on your own, but the point here is that if we increase demand, what effect will that have on real GDP and the price level? And the answer is, well, that depends on the slope of your aggregate supply curve. And here, I'm explaining to you, what the difference is in terms of how these curves are sloped one way as compared to sloped another way. How effective are fiscal automatic stabilizers are more effective than our discretionary fiscal policies. Now, Austrians would agree that automatic stabilizers are a good thing. I mean, here's a fiscal policy. Austrians would say they have a positive effect on the economy. Unemployment benefits would be accepted by Austrians, and they would say, this is a good idea. All right. The disagreement between Austrians and Keynesians comes in through automatic stabilizers. Through discretionary fiscal policies, not automatic stabilizers. And there's a lot of disagreement in, well, if you're going to depend on discretionary fiscal policies to stimulate demand this way or that way, then you can run into a lot of trouble, according to an Austrian economist. A Keynesian would say, well, if we just have enough facts and enough knowledge and got our hands on enough levers, that we can guide the economy to exactly the point we want. See, that would be Keynesian. So the disagreement between the two thoughts, it concerns discretionary fiscal policies, not automatic stabilizers. Okay. And one problem with this, of course, is what happened in the 1970s, for example, is that we had stagflation. And we got a whole chapter coming up on stagflation. But we had to invent that word back in the 70s because the economy was stagnating and inflating at the same time. Now, if you believe in these Keynesian fiscal policies, what do you do if you have stagflation? I mean, see, if you have unemployment, you want to increase demand. If you have inflation, you want to decrease demand. If you've got both problems, what do you do? You can't increase demand and decrease demand at the same time. And this is one point in our history where Keynesian economics really kind of fell out of favor for a while, because the only solution to stagflation, I'll end the lecture with this, but the only solution to stagflation is to increase the supply curve. If you shift the supply curve to the right, prices come down, employment goes up. You solve the problem of stagflation. But how do you increase the supply curve? Well, you might lower taxes on businesses, for example. You lower taxes on businesses, they have more money to invest, supply curve shifts to the right, prices come down, you get more employment. See, now, that would be a sort of an Austrian way of looking at it. But anyway, I've almost got done with this. So what are you going to do for next time? Read chapter 8, right? So we'll get into chapter 8 next time. I'll see you all next time.